Elizabeth, this meeting is being sent to YouTube, content to a third party. Hope everybody's doing well. I'm finally back from travels for the year, and I'm not going anywhere for a month and a half, so I'm very happy. Sit and do some image editing.
All right, I think we're live over on YouTube,
All
and
right.
you guys hearing me by unmuted myself and sounding
Yep.
good. All
Sounding
right,
good.
well, happy holidays, everybody! Welcome to the last office hours of 2024. We got a few announcements, and then we've got a bunch of questions from everyone, and we'll talk a little bit about the importance of culling your work down to its very essential best and some strategies and tips for doing that. So,
hmm
Rick, do you want to start off with some announcements and whatnot?
Well, I have really one announcement. I think that unless there's one that you're thinking about that I don't remember. But we've talked about, we haven't done an image gallery in a long time. And so we decided that for the first office hours of January of 2025, we'll do a image review. We'll do basically everyone's favorite image from 2024. Um, so we'll meet on January 7th at 10 a.m. So go through your work from this year. We talked a little bit about it last time, and come up with your favorite image that you took during the year, or maybe your best image. And I've already set the office hours page up. You can submit your image up through there. One image per person, please. If you can remember to name your photo for the upload, last name hyphen first name, that will help me sort of arrange things. We won't have the gallery the way we did it before. There's a bunch of problems with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take the submissions and I'll create a Lightroom gallery for it, and we'll show it the during the hour. We'll have a couple of prizes for ones that we deem extra special. But every time we do this, it's a blast. We love seeing your work and we love talking about it. So anyway, so the page should be live on the office hours page anytime within the next 3 weeks, I think. We'd love to see your work. I think that's all
Yeah,
I got.
and I think the other only other note was we had a couple people that had to back out of Costa Rica for family
Mm,
reasons. So
right.
we have two slots available for Costa Rica, which at the moment is the only open workshop in the store. Costa Rica is, I think you've seen enough content from David and my trips there and all the workshop participants that it's sort of a wildlife photographer's dream trip where you're just going to have constant practice in photographing wildlife. And David and I and Dennis Valverde, who's amazing. And it also works out with our trip to Botanica, which is a really beautiful deluxe resort in the jungle, being a wonderful trip for plus ones to come along too, with lots of opportunities for them to do interesting, cool excursions while we're off photographing and everybody gather around the pool in the evening. So it's a cool one. If you're interested at all, just let Rick know.
Just make sure you love monkeys. That's all I have to say about
There are
it.
there are many monkeys out in
Yeah.
Costa Rica.
Actually, now that you said that, I remember. So, um, in the next 3 weeks, we will be opening, it looks like a second Scotland workshop next year to follow the one in early October. Um, the Rainier workshop, I've got it almost ready to post, and we'll send out emails to the people on the wait list. Probably, I think probably the first week of the year. And then the Oregon Coast Brookings workshop, the same way. I've got that pretty much all set to go. We're just taking a break through the holidays. People are spending lots of money, and they've got other things going on. So we'll post those in January. Um, so, and if you're interested in a second Scotland workshop, if you go to the hudsonhenry.com/workshops, um, you can click on a link in the Scotland workshop to say I'm interested in the second one. Um, the everything is the same except for the dates. So
Yep.
Right. That's it.
Cool stuff.
Yeah, no Leica,
No,
Elizabeth.
no, no Leicas for
Yeah,
sadly, if only we could get them to sign on, that would be great. Maybe
yeah.
someday in the future. There could be some fun stuff from Naivo and Case. And so, all
All right.
right. Do you want to start off chatting a little bit about the importance of culling your work down to your very best to display to people what you're all about as a photographer, Rick?
Yeah, yeah. So, some of you who have been with workshops know that for about the past year and a half, I've been talking about working through building a portfolio. Um, and it's basically the portfolio of the work that I consider representative of who I am. And it, I've been collecting my favorite images over the years, and I have a bunch of different collections in Lightroom that contain anywhere from 25 to 70 images. Um, and then, like I said, about a couple of years ago, I realized that I needed to sort of work on, assembling my current list. And so it's been a long project. Um, and some of it is reworking the way I think about rating images, the way that I think about, um, sort of keywording and stuff. But also the fact that I spend time going through my old catalog, going through my images from, I've got images going back to 1998 in my Lightroom catalog. I have a bunch of film stuff from before that, but I've tended to just sort of think that most of the stuff in there is not great, uh, you know. And so for me, Hudson and I talked a lot about the way we cull, um, and the way we sort of work through the process of rating and sort of getting images ready for editing. Where it's, we go through our catalog. If an image has no stars with it, it's an image that for whatever reason we've decided to keep. An image with one star is what we call interesting. Doesn't mean we're going to edit it, but it sort of rises above that level of, no stars. Two stars is an image that we edit. That's we're interested in editing that. And then three stars to me is an image that has been edited, and that I consider to be worthy. Um, you know, Over the years, I've done all sorts of things. I use five stars, and four stars willy nilly and things like that. And part of the process of sort of getting my images together has been, I did this project a few years ago where every January and February I would pick a year in my catalog and I would go through every photo that I took that year. And it's a fascinating process. And what I find is there's a bunch of stuff in there that really should be deleted. It's out of focus. It's not a great composition, or I have seven others that are very similar. There was a period in the, like 2003 to 2005 where almost every shot, every photo I took was actually a five image composite for an HDR, which, those are hell to go through. But part of that process of going through every year has been re-ranking and re-rating images. I'll find photos that I look at the editing and I'm like, ooh, that's bad. Um, and so I'll redo those. But I go through and I clean up all of the ratings. I work on images. I have a collection I call images to work on, and that's where I'll put some of those images that I'm going, oh, well, this is interesting. I should try working on this one again, or I should try re-editing this one, or about how did I miss this one? But part of that process is everything gets re-rated in that year. I get rid of things that year. And that process, which, it's never complete, but at the end of 2022, yeah, at the end of 2022, I had pretty much gone through every year that was in my library. I re-cataloged everything. If you went in my library right now, there are no five-star images. There are 24-star images, which to me are portfolio images. Um, that's it. Everything else is three, two, one, or zero. I get rid of, I delete my rejects. I mean, there's no reason to keep a photo that's out of focus or any of that sort of stuff. And that process for me helped me winnow down. When I started working on my portfolio project last year, I had about 75 photos that I considered to be among my best. Um, and as I started thinking about this, the thing that I needed help with was to have people to talk to about photos, right? To sort of walk through things. Um, I've talked in the past about how when Hudson and I met, one of the things that sort of bonded us as photographers was we would go out and shoot, but we would also come back after shooting and we'd go to this wonderful restaurant in Portland that's no longer there called the Daily. And it'd be a group of us, 5 or 6 of us, and we would have dinner together and we would bring prints of work we had been doing over the past few months and we would talk about them. We would critique them, and it was a wonderful way to sort of get better ideas, and this is part of what we love so much about workshops, right? We go out on these workshops with, 10 or 12 other amazing photographers, and we get to look at the things they do. We get to talk about the work that they do.
And
Um,
that is by far, that's the magic.
yeah,
It's sharing and looking and critiquing and cheerleading, and the same thing that we had at the Daily. I love that we found a way to
yeah,
do that with a bigger group. It's
right.
wonderful.
Yeah. And so this year I had, like I said, I got down to about 75 photos. And what I wanted to do, because I print, I firmly believe that, a photograph needs to be printed. And I print all the time. So I had a number of images that I thought were my best. And I've already printed these guys small, but what I want for my finished portfolio is I want 16 by 20s or equivalent sizes of my portfolios in a portfolio box. That for me is what my portfolio is. You can see a Lightroom collection, but to me they need to be printed. And so when I got that 75, I basically took 13 by 19 paper and I printed all of those images, those 75 images. And seeing them in print, throwing them on the floor or on the wall. I have a large magnetic board in my workroom behind me, and I would just sort of put images up on there and look at them. And I'd have friends, people in town here who would come in, and I'd say, hey, what do you think about this one? What do you think about that one? You don't have to be a photographer to have some sort of connection to photos, and it's a lot easier when you're showing someone 5 photos or 7 photos, okay, as opposed to here's one. What do you think of this?
Mhm.
Um, so I started working on culling that down, and I got it down to 35 photos. And I will tell you that the number of those photos were images that I was attached to, and I needed help with. Well, that attachment's great because you went through some process to shoot that photo. Um, but that's where you needed help. And so I had 2 marathon sessions. I had one with my daughter and her fiance, um, where I had all of these images and we just I said, okay, they said, well, what do you think of your 20 photos? And I was like, okay. So I put down 20 photos and still had another, I think 17 or 18 that we didn't even show. And, we would talk about those, right? And the point is, what I'm trying to do is someone comes up to me who I don't know, or maybe I know them a little, and they say, "Well, we hear you're a photographer. What can I see your work?" And to me, to be able to show 20 photos that's enough. Um,
Mhm.
I want photos that are representative of who I am.
Mhm.
Um, and so went through this process. And we got 20, and I had one photo that I'm attached to. This one that I took in Scotland last year of these birches, and I kept saying, I love this photo. I want this photo to be in my portfolio, but is it portfolio worthy? And in the end, my daughter was like, Dad, no, and this is why. And so I ended up, what happens is during that whole process, I'm pulling things in, putting things out, and, ended up with, okay, well, this is what I think for my 20. And what was interesting in that first attempt was my daughter said, well, Dad, wait a minute, what about this image that you took like 15 years ago? And, there's so many of these images from images you took in the last 5 years,
Yeah.
you know, what what about this one? And that caused me to go back into like literally that night we went back into my catalog and I pulled three photos out that I had thrown out 6 or 8 months before when I was, they were in my 75, but it was like, yeah, well, no, no one wants to see that. And so that was it. We did that. And then the next night I figured that I had my 20 and Hudson and I spent 2.5 hours walking through those and looking at other photos that were, what about this one? What about that one? You know, um, and at the end of that night, I had my 20 and I was really happy with it. Um, you know, the other thing that I would say is I don't have just 20 great photos. I have a whole bunch more that I discovered. Like one of the, say again, if you know me, you've seen my work. What does Rick like? Rick likes windows and windows and doorways. Rick likes trees. Rick likes minimal, and he can do some interesting city work, And so it's like now, after having done this portfolio, and I've printed all 20 of those photos at 16 by 20 or whatever works for that.
Hmm.
And now my next step is to sort of go through and sort of take those different categories of photos that I work on so that I can then show, 10 photos of trees if that's what you
Hmm.
want to see. If you
Yep.
want to see my collection of window work, that sort of stuff. Um, I
I
don't
would
mean to
add
be so long-winded about it,
I would add
but
City Street Night for you too.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and it really is. It really was a fascinating project. I could
Hmm.
not have done it without help from other people. And I'm
I
not just
think
talking about Hudson and my daughter. I mean, I show images to people all the time and get feedback. Um,
I
like I said, I think going through your old work in a methodical way. This thing about picking a year, take a month and a half, go through, really look at it with your photographic eye as it is now. You'll get things in there. You're like, oh God, this is nowhere near a 5-star image. It really is a one, if that. you know, and show things to other people. I mean, it's important, I think, that you don't work in a vacuum. But as you grow as a photographer, I mean, we're all trying to grow as photographers. It feels to me like what you really want is to get a group of people who understand the type of work that you're after and just who can sort of help you with, well, yeah, that works, you know?
Mhm. And not
So,
necessarily your spouse, I mean, your spouse can be can be great too, but there are times where it's loaded. Well, what do you mean you don't like this image?
yeah.
And I think, it's
Well,
great to involve everyone in your life who has a discerning eye. My wife has an amazing eye, but at the same time, I think I also want to hear from Rick, and I also want to hear from, David, and I also want to hear from other photographer friends that I have opinions about which photo is better than another. And I think Rick said something really, really key here, which was, your birch photo from Scotland,
hmm
which, by the way, you took while I was crashing my drone into those very birch trees and
yep.
then wandered looking for it. We get emotionally attached to an image. It has a story for us, and there are multiple people that I see here in the Zoom meeting that I've seen emotionally attached to images that might not be the best of their work, but they feel like it is because that story of the capture has so much resonance with them. That photo is meaningful to them emotionally. And it's sometimes really hard to divorce yourself from what that photo means to you versus what it means to the casual observer who wanders in to see it. Um,
This is
and
that photo.
yeah,
You know.
and it's a
It's a,
great photo,
it is,
but
but I have,
compared to other work that you had sitting outside the portfolio, I mean, it was a thing where we kept bringing it in, taking it out, bringing it in, taking it out, but looking at some of your other stuff, I think the photo that you held up initially that looked blurry, where you took it through like a window that
Oh,
had that image is so cool. It's an old image. It was taken through glass, and it's everything's a bit blurry in it, but once you really look at it, you're like, wow, that's an amazing image. And I think engaging other people who don't have that emotional attachment to the image. I had my first encounter, I think, with this whole process was as I was coming up as a photographer. I had these mentors. A lot of you've heard me talk about them, John Eastcott and Eva Momatuk, who are amazing photographers, and they photographed for years and years for all kinds of prestigious publications, including National Geographic. And they had this annual party where they would invite people to do a slideshow of they'd have three slideshows each year. Their Boxing Day party at their house in upstate New York, and there were old Nat Geo photographers and photo editors and people. And it was, they invited me to show my Arctic National Wildlife Refuge show. And she told me, I think it was 25 images. That was the max. And I was like, but I show this show for Sierra Club, and I have 100 images in the carousel. It was a slideshow back in the day. And she said 25 images, and it'll be more powerful for that. And I just remember she said, when you give that show, there are moments when people in the audience go, oh, those are the ones. Those are the ones. Those are the ones. And you can tell your story with just the best, the smaller, the better. And I remember I culled it down to 25, and it was painful. And my slideshow I had given dozens of times. I would never give it any other way but with those 25 images after that. It was just a far stronger experience with just the very
yeah,
best images.
yeah. I mean,
And well, go ahead. I also was going to say that there was a person on the workshop. I won't say what workshop or what person. Amazing photographer. Early on, when we were starting up these workshops, David and I were on this one, and I remember him giving me a link to his website. I could tell he was an amazing photographer. He stood out as, wow, your work is amazing. What you're showing in the image reviews and classes are great. He sent me over to his website, and there were many, many trips to all different parts of the world on the website. And every gallery that you linked into had hundreds of images in it. There would
yeah,
be 30 images of the same scene taken different ways. And they're all beautiful images, but you can't take it in. It's overwhelming. You can't get a grasp of this person's work because there was just too much of it on display. It was an interesting thing that caught my eye. And I just think, there's a power in what Rick did. And sitting back with him and working on it this year has really spurred me to take all my free time, of which I don't have a whole lot of, to start working through my back catalog and engaging in the same process. And I just think it's really valuable. And at the same time, it also reminds me how far I've come, in the decades of photography that I've been doing and in this transition to digital, and how far the tools that we use to edit our photos have come. You can go
yeah,
back and look at images. If you captured them sharp and well exposed and raw 15, 20 years ago, you can still, well, 15 years ago, you can still do amazing things with those files to bring them up to date and
yeah.
edit them as you edit a modern file and find all kinds of new quality in there. And I also think that printing the portfolio is really important because I think we've all seen images that look great on a computer screen, but then you go to print it. Maybe you have someone else print it and you're like, wow, it just doesn't translate. Or, whoa, I see things that aren't quite
Yeah.
right in this image. Printing is a much more exacting and demanding process for your final end result. If you can get a really high quality large print, then you've taken a great image. And I think that printing really does bring your photography up to another level.
Yeah.
And we've had a number of people we've taken through our printing course that are our printing workshops that I think would echo those sentiments and get addicted. And it's a whole nother art to printing. So putting the two things together really makes a lot of sense.
One of the funny things to me about the process was up until the night that I had my review with my daughter and her fiance. I had three phone photos in my portfolio selection in that group, two of which were in what I considered to be my final portfolio. But at 16 by 20, all sorts of flaws started to show up. Um, and it was not that they're not good images. One of them I'm very much attached to and I love, and makes a beautiful small print. But there were just so many flaws that were a result of the processing on a small sensor. And one of the images that came in at the very end of the night with my daughter was this photo that I took of the San Francisco Bay Bridge at night in 2005 with a Pentax. I was reviewing cameras back then for Macworld, and we had a Pentax camera, and Ben Long and I went out one night, to shoot, and I shot the Bay Bridge with it. And I love that photo, but with the tools, I was able to use super resolution on this. I think it was a 4 megapixel image to get it up to where I got a beautiful print.
Yeah.
Um,
They'll take it to
so
16 megapixels. Yeah.
yeah, so I've I've kind of I've kind of I'm not as enamored of phone photography as I was a few years ago. Um, some of it I think is just I don't like the way that, I can't say anything about the Google side, but the way that Apple's processing their photos just it doesn't work for me. Um, Great for snapshots and stuff, but I'd rather carry around, a small camera with me like the Q2 or the RX1, or just a single lens on my Sony and try and capture stuff.
Yeah, and I agree 100% on the Google side too. And you can get a raw file out of it, but it just isn't the same quality that you're getting out of fine optics. I would rather carry this new little Z52 around
Yeah,
with fast 35 1.7 on it, or it just that you get a better result from a
yeah.
larger sensor and better glass. But it is
We had
phones are amazing for snapshots and family moments and all those sorts of things. 4 by 6
there are a
prints.
couple of comments in the Zoom chat. Paul, says I'm part of a local photography club, and we have monthly competitions. Um, and I consider the ones I win first or second place in point values from my portfolio. I think that's a good thing. I miss the camera clubs of 20 years ago. There were so many of them. I spoke at bunches of them in California over the years. I know Ben did a whole tour where he basically went and did camera club. They, there's still some great ones out there, and if there's one in your area, I would urge you to at least sort of check it out. You might find some like-minded people who you can go shoot with, and you can talk about images with and stuff like that. Um, and Elizabeth says if direct printing is a challenge, a cheap softcover book on MagCloud or one of the other expensive services, start with 20 to 25 images.
Yep,
But will give you a sense of your images on paper. And I agree with that wholeheartedly.
100%.
And the other thing that the small number of photos, eh, I try to be conscious of people's time. And I think that keeping your basic portfolio down so that it's small enough so someone can digest it in a short time um, is 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 a smart thing to do for their time. They're willing to give you the time to look at and talk about your work. Being thoughtful of that, is one more reason why, I ended up on 20. Um, I don't think there's a problem with 15 or 20 or 25, but as long as you can sort of keep it down. And then, like I
Hmm.
said, someone says, "Oh, well, you got this thing for Windows. Do you have some more window photos to show?" Yeah, and it's like, yeah, I could do that. Um, I grew up with the neighborhood dad who had 4 slide carousels to show us of their trip to Maine for a week. It was like, I don't want to do that to people.
No, no, I had a great uncle who would show up, and inundate us with photos, and then he got a camcorder, and then life got horrible when he'd come to visit. He'd watch hours of unedited camcorder footage and never forget.
Um, so there were a bunch of questions, some of which I think hopefully we've talked about. Um, but I think there were one of the things that I think people were really interested in were, that sort of whole culling process. And
Mm-hmm.
then once you've done that, I would argue that sort of portfolio level work is at a much higher level. So you're going to be looking at those photographs of yours that one, you've edited, two, you do think are special in some way, whether you've gotten feedback that this is a great image or, um, you know, again, going through your work, your older work, I think is really helpful. It helps identify certain things that you're drawn to, you know, you know, I didn't know I was shooting windows for a long time. It was just, but that was what I got. And if I go through a lot of my really old window shots, they're not great. I've deleted a bunch of them. Um, but it was like it wasn't until, 5 or 6 years ago where I was like, oh, okay, this is the type of stuff that I like. I like night shots. I like, city at night. I've taken tons of them. Um,
Yep.
and it's like you start to see patterns in the way you shoot, what you think, all of that sort of stuff. I mean, a large part of getting your you know culling your work down to your best is your work. I mean, this was a lot of time that I spent just sort of going through different photos. Well, was this one, and there were tons of photos that had formerly been in my pantheon of, if someone said, show me your best work, that didn't make it into this group. They just didn't. Some of that was because I've grown as a photographer. Some of it, funnily enough, were photos that I took that same time, but were a completely different subject. But I was connected more to that subject than I was to the image that I thought was great, So,
I have over the years, just like Rick, there was a time where, my best images of the shoot were 5 stars. And you suddenly realize, well, that's not very easy to separate out what really is your best work over time. And I've mostly gone through and eliminated all of that, like Rick, where I don't have anything over 3 stars. But it's gotten hard because I have over 1,000 images that I think of as 3 stars at this point in my collection. And so as I do this process, I'm going back and I'm re-editing my best of work. And I'm making sure that I'm not too far out of alignment with my current organizing process in each year as I go through them. I'm not going through and bringing everything up to date to how I organize today, but I'm getting it so that it's easier to cull through and find what I'm after in my library as a whole. And I'm also moving more than Rick is into the 4 star category, but I'm keywording portfolio and then creating a smart
yeah,
collection because I need to have more than 25 images that stand out from those 1,000 3 star images. But I can use the keyword portfolio and then create a smart collection that just gathers anything with the keyword portfolio, and that does the same thing too. I don't. There's multiple ways to accomplish this, um, but it's a great
yeah.
process.
Keywording is very important. Keywording and collections, whether you're using Lightroom on one, um,
Hmm. Albums and all.
so I had a collection called Portfolio Prospects, or I can't remember exactly what it was called. And I made that a target collection. And so when I was going through and doing different bits of processes, I would put them into that. And then when I had that collection, back in 2015, 16, it was 75 people. I called it Portfolio Candidate, and so then it's like I can do a search for that and come up with those. All of the photos that are in my 2024 portfolio have Portfolio 2024 listed in them.
Yep.
Because I had some photos that were Portfolio 2013, Portfolio 2016. Um, so it gives me a sense of what I did and when. Um, and uh, smart collections are great for those types of things. One of the so I've done my portfolio. I've got prints. You're not seeing me. I'm not bringing my portfolio with me to workshops, but people want to see them. So I ended up using Lightroom's, web share, feature to share my portfolio, so people can see it. Um, One of the downsides of smart collections is you can't share smart collections, but it's easy enough to take those photos, create an actual static collection for it, and share that one.
Easy,
Um,
yeah.
so I think you do want to make them in a way that is presentable. Um, so that Lightroom web collection sort of works for me. I can show it on my iPad. I can connect to a TV with it. Um, and it's fun, and I've shown, I think, three or four of my workshop friends my portfolio during workshops, and I love the process. I love hearing what people have to say. It makes me feel good that people are interested, that they want to see sort of my work. Um, and I think it's also spurred some of them on. I know, Carl, you're talking about doing a portfolio. Um, I just think it's a wonderful way to start sharing your work with a larger audience. So,
You know, Glenn over on YouTube had a really good question. He said, "What gets 5 stars then?" And my response to that is, it's taken me over 20 years to gather more than a thousand 3-star images to start grading those out into 4-star. Hopefully, I got 20
yeah,
more years of photography saying things go well. Well, maybe at some point I'll have too many 4-star images and I'll need that final portfolio grade, when
yeah,
I'm in my
yeah.
80s. That's where I'm
So
going to start
yeah,
5 stars
and,
together.
and I will say that this also part of it is, you've got hundreds of thousands of images. I've got 90,000 images at this point in my library, and um, I part of this process is trying to spare my daughter and my wife, doesn't even know Lightroom at all. You know, Something happens to me and they want to do something with my photos. They've got kind of a key,
Yep.
to sort of help find those things that I thought were important and that they might want to feel are important as well. Um,
Pike
you
and,
know,
Pike and Pepper already understand the star rating.
yeah. Well, and the other thing about star ratings is do you really need 6 levels of dispersion for your photo collection? I'd argue no. Like I said, when I started, it was all over the map. But this whole no star, 1 star, 2 star has worked really well for me for the last
Yep.
8 or 9 years.
Yep.
Um, you know, why split it up into 5, 6 levels?
Yep.
And part of the process, and did I have some 4-star images when I started this project a year and a half ago? Yeah, I did. But I was like, almost all of those were either 3, or I'm like, yeah, you're being a bit overinflated here. Um, so I think just because we think 5-star means the best, right? It's the best restaurant, it's the best whatever. It's like you don't have to use it. You don't
No.
have to use it. There you go. Paul says 5-star sold for over $1,000. So, but
Uh, no, I think having some headroom is what those stars are about. I wouldn't get out of 3 until you need to. I do when I am out shooting, you know, I come in at the end of the day and I run through all the images really, really quickly. And like Rick said, they get either marked X for deletion and they filter out, or I can't quite decide whether to delete it or not. It gets left 0. That's an interesting photo. I don't know that I want to edit it. That's a 1. Ooh, that's 1. That's the best of those. I want to edit that one. I really like that one. That's a 2. And I run through, and maybe I shot 500 images during the day, and I wind up with 200 of them deleted and 100 of them 1 star and 35 2 stars. Well, now all of a sudden I filter to 2 stars and 35 images to go through and take a look at which ones do I really want to edit. Maybe I move a few into the 1 star category, because that other
yeah,
one later was better. And then I come down to where I've only got 22 images that I actually need to edit from the day. And all of a sudden, finding the 5 best images from the day is a cakewalk. And I don't want to touch any editing sliders on anything until I'm called down to knowing what from the day I want to edit. And if you can do that, if you can run through, if you can do it quick and just do some light editing at the end of the day to see what worked and what didn't work, you're going to do better the next day because you just learned what you did well and what didn't work the day before.
Yeah.
And it's going to just make your life easier. So that's and you don't need more than 2 stars to get through that process. If you edit one and you love it, it's wow, that's a photo I'm proud of. That's when it gets its 3rd star.
Okay. Let's see what else we got. Um,
Hmm. Jenny asks whether we're tempted to sort our 3 and 4 star images into categories. And I think that Rick, you spoke to that a little bit with, over time, yes. But I think that that's not so hard to do once you get to 4 star images. Once you
yeah.
start building a
Yeah.
portfolio, it starts becoming apparent, what I love landscapes with a strong foreground and a lot of sky. I love ultra wide angle landscapes. I like tight landscapes where it's just, a little bit. And I like environmental portraits of people with place, and again, like Rick, I love night scenes. So, you start sort of building on all of that.
Yeah. And part of my process for my portfolio was, I had a large number of images that I shot in the Palouse and large number of images that I shot on Sauvie Island, in the fog that were are to me are really good photographs. And, it was difficult, and that's where I really needed help to sort of pick the ones that were, should go in the portfolio. I didn't want to have 4 photos from Sauvie Island fog days and 3 Palouse images because that takes up some slots. I mean, one of the things I'm trying to show in my portfolio, is these are the types of environments that I thrive in photographically.
Mhm.
Someone wants to say, "Well, I love these foggy, moody, minimalist shots. These are wonderful." It's like, well, I can show you more if you'd like. Um, so, I really recommend that you do it, even if you don't go as far as we go with, ending up with 16 by 20 prints. I mean, maybe you end up with a book that you use, build through Blurb or any of the other guys out there.
Mhm.
Um, you know, and I'll say one thing about years ago it was like, well, don't ask your spouse because your spouse just thinks you're great and doesn't want to crush you. Um,
Mine's the
over the
opposite.
Yeah, I was going to say over the past 10 years, my wife Susan, she and I talked about it. She's been out with me enough shooting. She's looked at final photos of mine. I trust her gut when she's like looking at photos. Well, this one doesn't do anything for me, and it's like I don't think you have to be a photographer to offer good critical feedback. I think
100%.
though that having photographer friends who can sort of help you through the process is really worthwhile. I think it's really worthwhile. I mean, you know,
And that's been one of the joys of us with these workshop experiences is watching those friendships form in the course of workshops and
yeah,
have, having
yeah,
these WhatsApp groups live on with people critiquing each other or email groups and people going on trips on their own. And it's just wonderful to see those groups forming where people are on their creative journey together and learning from one another. That really is the joy of the whole thing.
yeah, I agree.
Um, I've seen a number of questions lately. Should we talk really fast? Not to switch, maybe we switch topics a little bit, about the whole Adobe and their pricing plan thing. You want to talk about that at all? Because I've gotten a
Do I
number
want to
of,
talk about it? I do not want to talk about it. It's very
well,
confusing. Uh,
it is, except, actually Matt Kay did a video that I got in my feed this morning, and while I was setting up the meeting, I just listened to it really quick. And he laid it out pretty cleanly that if you're a person who likes Lightroom Classic and Photoshop like Rick and I do, and we yeah, we're working on some training associated with that. But if you have that plan that's currently $9.99 a month, uh, if you pay it annually, if you pay your 129 a month, if you switch your plan to be paid annually and you keep it up to date, nothing is going to change. They're not going to raise your price. You get grandfathered in. If you let your plan lapse and come in as a new applicant for the photographer's plan, you're not going to see it anymore after January 15th. It's just going to be gone. January 1st or January, I think he said 15th.
15th, yeah.
The only plan offered from there on will be the 1 terabyte plan where they're trying to get you into storing your photos in their cloud. And it'll be like 19.99 a month. But
Yep.
if you currently are holding the 9.99 photographer's plan, you get grandfathered in. And if you set it up, I think he said something about the price going up by like $5 or $6 if you pay by the month, but it'll stay at
14.99. Yeah.
it'll stay at 9.99 if
Yeah.
you pay annually, and you make sure you're locked into that before January 15th. If at any moment after January 15th you let your plan lapse for any reason, you'll never get it back. But as long as you're grandfathered in right now, you can keep your plan for Lightroom Classic and Photoshop at the price that you're used to. So
Yeah. I don't think they're getting rid of Classic. That's come up from a number of people who've sent me emails in the last few days. They're
people like Rick
continuing
and
to
I would
develop for it.
people like Rick and I would go crazy if they did that.
We would go crazy, but we'd figure it out. I mean, the one of the things that keeps me there is, Camera Raw and the fact that XMP files save all of my editing data and all of that sort of stuff. So, I'm in for the long haul because Camera Raw to me is still the best raw engine out there. Um, I think that I was telling Al and a group of us via email that last year was they raised the right price of the full Creative Cloud bundle, and
Yep.
it was, I think, 9 years it was that price. I mean, I went back and looked. So this is the first big price increase in that, and it wasn't big. I mean, it was like $50 more a year or something.
We're up to it's over $600 a year now, or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, I
So,
mean,
but
both Rick and
it's
I
like
paid for
we
that.
use that.
Hmm.
Yeah, we use that. And I kind of feel like this is that another part of that. The photography plan was always separate from the Creative Cloud full plan,
Right.
um, and so they're getting rid of that first tier that was the entry level 999, which they've had since whatever it was, 2013 or 14. And you know, I mean, a terabyte of storage if you're going to be using the online stuff is not bad. Ultimately, I think they want to push everybody to Lightroom Cloud, uh, because then you can start charging for more storage and all of that sort of stuff. And, as I said, I think when we talked about this in August, I'm not going to put all of my stuff in Adobe's cloud, especially the way that they've set it up and what it would cost me,
Yeah.
and the little local editing thing that they added into Lightroom Cloud earlier this year is not for me. It's not right now. They've not The functionality in it is nowhere near what I want for editing my photos.
I
So
took one look at it and I saw it's completely divorced, it's completely removed from what's in the cloud. You can't keep those libraries synchronized and see what's in your local while you're in the cloud, or see what's in the cloud while you're in your local editing. And what you have local doesn't have nearly as much power to edit as Lightroom Classic or what's up in the cloud. So if you're going to use that app, you need to move things to the cloud to truly edit them, and then you won't see them in your local folders. And I mean, yeah, it does. It's too disconnected and doesn't work well. It would drive you towards using more and more cloud storage, which I think is kind of the plan. Um,
yeah, Yeah. And for me, my photos are stored in the cloud. Yes, they're stored via black Backblaze, and that's much less expensive than Adobe's cloud storage. And, if something happens, I can get a hard drive with all of my photos on it sent to me from Backblaze.
Yeah.
So you know, I, I don't, there's a bunch of the cloud stuff that I like. I love the fact that I can use Lightroom on my tablet, on my phone, on my computer, share things, put web galleries up and all that sort of stuff. But, you know,
But with Lightroom Classic, you can also synchronize collections so that that all works on your tablet or your phone, whether you're Android or iOS. And you can create smart previews of files you want to bring along on the road, which are then
yeah,
editable, and you can export small JPEGs from them, even though they're just sorting your catalog and the master files are back home on your big storage or your NAS. I mean, and there's just a lot of flexibility with the catalog if you understand how to use it. Um,
yeah. The other thing I'll say is, Adobe has shifted. Adobe is freaking huge, and they've got all of these other businesses that have nothing to do with photography. And I think as part of that, their communication has gotten worse. And the thing that I say, remember earlier this year when they had the thing about training your images with AI and everybody went ballistic and Adobe had to correct it because they were confusing in what they said and how they said it. And this is the same thing here. They don't make things any easier. It's almost like they're purposely trying to confuse people, but when they
yeah,
do, everyone gets up in arms, and
yeah.
it drives me crazy.
They could
It
use a
drives me
photographer
crazy.
relations department, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
But I
I
mean,
mean,
I
they've come
think
a
that,
long way. They've come a long way from when they were a company that was focused solely on creative output.
oh
They just
yeah.
have, you know.
And my words of advice, if you're enjoying Lightroom Classic, I would say think long and hard and experiment a bit with the cloud-based version if you're thinking about it. And I would say, make sure that you have that subscription. If you like the 9.99 subscription, make sure you've got it locked in right now and switch your billing to annual. Um,
Al
Jerry
said
Watson.
Adobe's. Al said Adobe's must be using AI generated text, which I think is pretty funny.
So Jerry Watson asked about the new Z9 firmware update, and I was reading about that a bit bleary-eyed this morning as I woke up, and I've read some reports on it. It is very, very heavily video focused. There's a lot happening in the Nikon world with video, with the acquisition of Red, and they're kind of upping the game. I think the coolest thing that I saw in the firmware is that you can set your mode in video to do what's called 180-degree shutter, which means you're capturing half of the time based on the frame rate. So that if you switched your frame rate from 30 frames a second to 120 frames a second, it would automatically switch you from 60th of a second to 240th of a second. You wouldn't have to think about it. It's definitely video centric enhancements. Lots of stuff for their new power zoom lens that's more for professional video grade work. Um, Different controls for that. I didn't see a whole lot for photographers in the firmware update. So,
Okay, I'm trying to see if there's any other sort of questions, general questions. Well, this is topical. Santa Fabio asks, she's going to Costa Rica in the future. Her question is, can the Z52 be set up for travel with long glass and the 20 millimeter I have for my Z8? I'm looking for a smaller and lighter setup for this trip. And rather fortuitous, you've been working with the Z52.
so wait. She's asking if you could set up the Z52 with the long lens and then carry the wider angle on the
I think
bigger.
what she's saying is instead of taking the Z8,
Hmm.
is, you know, bring long glass on the 20 millimeter. Would that be a decent lighter setup?
I have been shooting for the last couple of weeks with some family interruptions and stuff. with the Z52, and it's blown my mind that they included everything that they included in this little camera. I mean, it does have the original 20 megapixel sensor from the D500, which we all loved. It's a good clean sensor. It's 20 megapixels. David shot for ages with 20 megapixels with his D5. You can hit super resolution on a nice sharp file and it yields 80 megapixels. The more we start playing with that, the more amazing that enhanced panel is in Adobe. Or, there's resize AI and on one. There's lots of cool products out there to increase resolution on a nice sharp file. This camera does pre-release capture for up to a second if you're holding the shutter down halfway, just like the Z8 and Z9. It has all of the tracking, the subject detection modes that you have in the Z8 and the Z9, bird detect and vehicle detect and airplane detect and people and animals. And I was out Sunday at a wildlife refuge and it was locking, herons and egrets' eyes, which are usually pretty complicated, even at a distance with brush and stuff, which I was impressed with. It's a great little camera. And even its little kit 50 to 250 millimeter lens, which comes in at, the equivalent of 24 to 375, is shockingly good. The one thing with the smaller sensor that you miss out on is wide angle work. To get the equivalent of a 14 millimeter lens, you'd need less than 10 millimeter focal length, which, changes the view of the world. And you get almost no depth of field with a focal length that short. But you get a gain with your long lenses. Suddenly, your 100 to 400 gives you the field of view equivalent of a 150 to 600. I always loved back in the day when I had the D810 and the D500, because the D810 was 36 megapixels, and if you went down to crop mode, it went to like 14 or something, and the D500 kept me at 20 megapixels, and was I kept that on the long lens and the wide angles on the D810. Um, these days, with the Z9 and the Z8 being 46 megapixels, they crop to about the same 20 megapixels as this camera captures if you go into DX mode. This isn't as rugged, and it isn't as fast, and it isn't as amazing a camera as a Z8 or Z9 by any means. It's not the modern D500, because the D500 would have to come up quite a bit to be that. But it's a very capable little camera, and I think you could absolutely do that. I think you could and be happy with it. You're not going to have problems with autofocus, that's for sure. That I think that this camera, and I'm going to do a video about it, but I think this camera is a great backup for those whose main camera is a Z6 III or a ZF, because it's got that longer reach with long glass for wildlife sports and action scenes, and it's just as capable. And you still get 20 megapixels, whereas if you reduce those 24 megapixel cameras, you drop down to like 10 or 8
Yeah.
megapixels in DX mode. Um, and I think it's a wonderful camera, for that young person on your Christmas list just getting into photography to grow with, or someone on a budget. Because the other thing I have sitting next to it right here are all these lenses. And there's a couple of exotics. These guys are $500 and are amazing APS-C lenses, but everything else is in the like 100 to $200 range, or comes with the camera in a kit, and they're fast, fun primes with great bokeh. They're just designed to cast a smaller image circle for that DX sensor. I mean, a person who's on a budget can get so much camera for the money with this little guy compared to anything full frame. I think it's a great camera. I've been having a lot of fun with it. And yeah, I think if you were trying to go light in Costa Rica, you'd have a really good time with it, 100%, especially with the 100 to 400, and then a fast prime, like you said. The Viltrox has made some really nice primes for this camera. They've kind of been blowing me away. They've got this new Air series, they call it, and they have one that's actually launching tomorrow. That's on the camera right now. It's a 35 1.7, and I'm just shocked at how razor sharp this thing is wide open corner to corner on the APS-C crop. I mean, it's a beautiful lens, and its bokeh's great, and it's light, and it's, I think, retails for $170. You know, that's what you get with a smaller sensor. You get everything more affordable, smaller, and lighter. Again, you lose out at the wide angle end, but for things like Costa Rica where everything's long, or Africa, it's great. You wind up with more reach with your lenses.
All right. Well, there we go. Last office hours of the year. Remember, January 7th, we'll do a gallery of everyone's best or favorite work from 2024. The office hours page, hudsonhenry.com/office hours. It's already set up. One
Mhm.
image, please. JPEG 3000 on the long edge. And if you could name your file last name hyphen first name, that would help me in sort of building the portfolio, building the collection. And there's the basically the normal form for office hours is set up there with an upload file link. You can put image title, and if there's anything else you'd like to say about the photo, you can put it in there as well. And
If you have a
we'll look forward
burning
to.
question, if you have a burning question, can submit it, but it probably will get held for the next office hour.
Yeah, I took the question.
Oh,
What do you
never
want to ask
mind.
out of it? Yeah, because we will spend the entire hour. So we'll start, and then we'll have one office hours before we head off on our spring workshop push. So
Yep.
so I hope everyone has a great Christmas, New Year's, Hanukkah. Um, keep shooting, and we'll see you guys in 2025.
All right,
Thank
everybody.
you so
Happy
much.
holidays.
Bye,
Enjoy the.
everybody.
Bye, guys.
Thank you
See
all.
ya.
Happy holidays.